I want you to imagine you're standing on the sidelines of a race. But this isn't your standard track and field event.
Right. Definitely not a sprint.
No, not at all. It's this grueling, never-ending global marathon. And all 194 countries on Earth are out there on the course.
Yeah, all of them.
So if you look at the front of the pack, you see the usual suspects, right? You have these incredibly wealthy, highly industrialized nations, and they're running in top-tier gear.
They've got the carbon fiber shoes.
Exactly. They have teams of personal trainers handing them custom electrolyte blends, and they have these perfectly mapped-out pacing strategies guided by, like, supercomputers.
I mean, they're essentially running a race that they designed the rules for.
Yeah, that is exactly it. But then I want you to look way, way back, like miles behind the leaders. You have a runner who, by almost every conventional metric, is just struggling to stay upright.
Just survive.
Right. They're running barefoot on scorching asphalt. They barely have access to water stations. Their support team is, well, practically non-existent. And according to the official rankings, they are firmly stuck in the bottom 30% of the entire world.
It's a bleak picture.
It really is.
Yeah.
But then, right in the middle of this grueling marathon, the terrain suddenly shifts. The race officials introduce this highly specific, absolutely crucial obstacle course.
Something that requires a totally different kind of balance, right?
Yeah.
Social coordination.
Yes, and suddenly, that barefoot runner from the back of the pack doesn't just navigate the obstacle, they absolutely fly through it. They are completely lapping almost all of those wealthy, high-tech competitors who are, suddenly stumbling all over the place.
It is, without exaggeration, one of the most fascinating statistical paradoxes we see in modern global development.
It's wild. Okay, let's unpack this, because that brings us to the mission of our deep dive today. I was recently poring over the latest global data, specifically the 2023 Human Development Reports.
Massive data drop.
Oh yeah, hundreds of pages. And I stumbled across the Republic of Kiribati.
Right.
And for those of you who might not have a globe handy right now, Kiribati is this very remote island nation situated right in the central Pacific Ocean. It's actually made up of 32 coral atolls and one raised coral island.
And they're spread out over an expansive ocean that is roughly the size of India.
Which is huge.
It's massive, and it's a nation on the absolute front lines of geographic and economic isolation.
So when you measure their overall progress using the standard global baseline, they rank 140th out of 194 countries.
Yeah.
They're, deeply under-resourced.
Very much so.
But this is the hook that we are going to spend this deep dive trying to unravel. When you adjust the lens and measure specifically for gender parity, Kiribati suddenly ranks fourth.
Fourth in the entire world.
Fourth. Out of 194, they beat out massive economic superpowers. So the core question we have to answer for you today is how? How does a nation with such severe resource constraints architect a society with greater gender equity than almost the entire industrialized world?
To answer that, we really have to move completely past the surface level numbers. The fact that they rank fourth is, well, it's the symptom, not the cause.
Right, it's just the headline.
Exactly. We need to dissect the underlying anatomy of their society, because when you piece together this specific puzzle, you start to reveal the hidden mechanics of multidimensional poverty.
Yeah, and you really see how a society distributes its meager resources when survival is literally on the line.
Right. And you confront the massive looming shadow of ecological pressure. Kiribati isn't just some quirk in a global spreadsheet. It's a profound masterclass in how human capital is prioritized when a country has almost nothing else to fall back on.
I feel like before we can even attempt to solve this mystery, we need to calibrate our instruments.
Good idea. The alphabet soup of development.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The people who architect these global reports rely heavily on an overall baseline called the HDI, the Human Development Index.
Which is the core foundation.
Right. Now, you've probably heard this term thrown around in the news. I like to think of it as essentially the global grade point average for a country.
Yes, and it's really important to understand why the HDI was created in the first place. Because for decades, the world measured progress almost exclusively through gross domestic product, GDP.
Just a giant calculator.
Exactly, just tallying up the sheer volume of money a country produced. But in the 1990s, economists finally realized that a massive GDP doesn't mean much if your citizens are sick, uneducated, and living in squalor.
It's like asking how much money does the school have, instead of are the students actually surviving long enough to learn anything?
That's a great way to put it. The HDI was revolutionary because it forced the world to measure progress across three specific dimensions: a long and healthy life, access to knowledge, and a decent standard of living.
Okay, so if we use that HDI baseline and we trace the world's overall progress from, say, 1990 to 2023, you see quite a roller coaster ride.
Oh, absolutely.
Back in 1990, the global average was hovering around zero point 0.6. And then by 2019, right before the world basically shut down, we had climbed to roughly 0.745.
We were making this steady, undeniable climb as a global community.
Yeah, it was looking good. And then the system just broke.
It did. The data from 2020 and 2021 shows a massive historic regression. The worldwide HDI dropped to 0.742.
Which doesn't sound like a lot, like, oh, it dropped 0.02 of a point.
Yeah, but in the context of global data, a drop of even a few fractions of a point represents a complete cataclysm.
Right, you're talking about billions of people.
Exactly. It represents global supply chains entirely collapsing, millions of children being locked out of shuttered schools for years, a horrific plunge in life expectancy due to the virus. I mean, economies contracted so violently that decades of poverty eradication were just wiped out overnight.
It was a collective global backslide. Now, if you fast forward to the 2023 data, the world has technically bumped back up to an all-time high. It's sitting right around 0.756.
But the devil is in the details there.
Yeah. When you actually read the fine print of the report, that recovery is incredibly jagged. It is not even. The wealthy runners at the front of the pack, they bought new shoes and kept running. But the runners at the back, they are still nursing broken ankles from 2020.
Which brings us back to Kiribati.
Right. Their trajectory is completely different from that global roller coaster. Back in 2005, their HDI was down at 0.588. By 2023, they've managed a slow, grueling climb up to 0.644.
It is the definition of a resilient climb. I mean, they didn't experience the massive, volatile spikes of highly industrialized nations, but they stubbornly maintained an upward trajectory despite facing hurdles that most nations can't even fathom.
Yeah, but we do need to ground this conversation in reality before we get to the miracle part of the story.
Right, because climbing to 0.644 is a monumental achievement for their domestic government, but it still leaves them profoundly disadvantaged on the global stage.
The world average is 0.756. Kiribati is down to 0.644. They are fighting a daily uphill battle, extreme geographic isolation, a severe lack of arable land.
And the literal, physical rising of the Pacific Ocean threatening to swallow their infrastructure.
So the stage is set for you. They're ranked 140th. The struggle is real, and it's constant. But if they are fighting just to keep their heads above water, how do we explain this anomaly?
This is where we bring in the second measurement tool, the Gender Development Index, or the GDI.
Right, so if the HDI is the overall grade point average for the nation, the GDI is like the auditor walking into the school, dividing the room and asking, wait a minute, are the boys and the girls actually getting the same grades?
Exactly. The GDI takes that baseline human development score and measures the parity between the genders. Perfect equality would be a score of 1.0.
And if we look at the global average for 2023, the world sits at roughly 0.955.
So on a macro scale, the world is doing decently, but there is still a persistent, measurable gap. Men generally have greater access to health, education, and wealth than women on a global scale.
And this is where the spreadsheet practically jumps off the desk. Kiribati's 2023 GDI is 0.976.
It's astounding.
They're in Group 1. They are ranked 4th globally. When I first saw that, I honestly assumed it had to be a typo.
It's a very common reaction.
I thought maybe it was the result of some massive temporary influx of targeted foreign aid that just skewed the numbers for a year.
But it's not. When you dig into the mechanics of their society, it's completely organic. And the data points directly to a single foundational pillar.
Education.
Education. Specifically, a metric called expected years of schooling.
This is where we uncover what sociologists call a reverse education gap, and the magnitude of it in Kiribati is just staggering.
To give you some context on this, if you average out the entire globe, women are currently expected to stay in school for roughly 13.09 years, and men are at about 12.9 years.
So globally, it's basically neck and neck. Women have a tiny, tiny edge.
Right.
But in Kiribati, that gap is blown wide open in favor of women. A young woman in Kiribati is expected to stay in the educational system for 12.4 years.
And a young man.
A young man is projected to leave school at just 11.33 years. That is more than a full year of difference.
What's fascinating here is that this completely short-circuits our traditional assumptions.
It really does.
Uh-huh.
Because you usually assume that in a lower income developing nation with very scarce resources, a patriarchal society will just default to prioritizing the education of its sons.
Right.
So why is the exact opposite happening here? Why are the girls staying in school so much longer?
To understand the why, you have to mentally transport yourself to a coral atoll.
Okay, picture the beach.
Right, but picture the physical environment and the available mechanisms for actual survival. In a highly industrialized Western society, educational parity is often achieved through top-down institutional funding, legislation and grants.
Yeah, policy changes.
But in a resource-scarce environment like Kiribati, education isn't just about self-actualization. It is a vital strategic tool for family survival.
Right.
What this reverse education gap reveals is a deep structural adaptation. On these islands, daily physical survival requires immense manual labor, specifically traditional fishing and subsistence agriculture in incredibly unforgiving conditions.
So the boys are essentially being pulled out of the classroom earlier to go to work on the boats or in the fields.
Precisely. Young men are absorbed into the immediate informal labor economy because their physical labor provides the daily calories the family needs to survive today.
That makes sense.
But the families aren't just thinking about today. They recognize that the only path to long-term stability like government employment or administrative work is through formal education. So they keep their daughters in the classroom.
It's a dual survival strategy.
Exactly.
The family is hedging its bets. They deploy the sons into immediate physical labor to sustain the household in the short term, while they fiercely protect the daughter's time, allowing them to accumulate the intellectual capital required to secure the family's long-term future.
And the compounding effects of that strategy are exactly what propel Kiribati to fourth in the world in gender development.
Because it snowballs.
It does. High educational investment in women is the ultimate catalyst for gender parity. When you ensure a woman receives over 12 years of education, you aren't just giving her a diploma, you are drastically altering her health literacy. You are statistically delaying the age at which she has her first child.
And you're giving her the prerequisite skills to eventually enter the formal cash economy.
Right. Kiribati proves that even when a nation is starved for physical resources, the cultural choice to prioritize female education can yield world-leading statistical parity.
Okay, I hear you. And the educational foundation is incredibly impressive. But I have to push back a little bit here.
Go for it.
Let's step out of the classroom and look at the bank account. Because a high school diploma is great, but does it actually shield these women from the realities of poverty when they enter the real world?
That is the crucial question.
Right. It's time to talk about income. If we look at the gross national income per capita, what does the global wealth gap look like between men and women?
Globally, the economic reality is quite grim for parity. On average, a woman globally earns a gross national income of roughly $14,943 a year. A man earns over $25,750.
Wow. So on a global scale, men are earning roughly 1.7 times more than women.
Yes, the world is vastly richer than it was 30 years ago, but that wealth is distributed with severe inequality.
Now let's drop those global numbers and look at the reality on the ground in Kiribati. And the absolute numbers are, well, they're sobering.
Very.
Women in Kiribati earn roughly $3,948 a year. Men earn just over $6,009. So we are talking about severe absolute poverty compared to the rest of the world.
Right, the absolute wealth is extremely low.
However, and this is the absolute crux of our paradox, if you calculate their relative income gap, men in Kiribati are earning about 1.5 times what women earn.
Which means the income gap between men and women in Kiribati is actually tighter and more equitable than the global average.
Right. But honestly, how much should we be celebrating this?
It's a fair point.
I mean, yes, the mathematical ratio is better. A gap of 1.5 times is smaller than 1.7 times. But everyone is making so much less. It feels like, bragging that everyone in the lifeboat is getting the exact same daily ration of water, when the reality is there's only 1 cup of water to go around.
That's a great analogy.
Is there really any comfort in equal poverty? If both genders are struggling to buy basic necessities, the fact that they are struggling equally doesn't actually put food on the table.
Your skepticism is entirely justified, and you've just highlighted the major philosophical limitation of these indices.
Right, because it's just a ratio.
Exactly. The GDI measures relative parity, not absolute prosperity. Equity in a low-resource setting is a profound double-edged sword.
How so?
Well, on one side of the blade, it demonstrates a deeply ingrained social fairness. The limited cash resources that do flow through the island economy are not being monopolized by men. That level of structural balance is something many trillion-dollar economies have completely failed to achieve.
Okay, that's true. But on the other side of the blade,
The other side reveals the crushing need for absolute economic growth. A society can cut the pie perfectly in half, but if the pie is the size of a coin, both people are still starving.
right, human flourishing is severely capped by the absolute lack of capital.
The data from Kiribati forces us to sit with two conflicting truths simultaneously. They are global pioneers in relative economic fairness while desperately requiring absolute economic intervention to survive.
So education and income give us part of the picture. But inequality isn't just about what's in your wallet. We need to look at the physical toll of inequality.
The literal life and death metrics.
Exactly. Let's introduce another tool from our kit, the GII, or the Gender Inequality Index.
This metric strips away the economics entirely.
Right. It looks at reproductive health, empowerment, and the labor market. It basically measures the physical friction holding women back. And the most visceral metric here is the maternal mortality ratio.
The MMR. The MMR measures how many mothers die per 100,000 live births. It is one of the most brutally honest indicators of how well a society's foundational healthcare system functions. And the historical trend for Kiribati is a massive, unmitigated victory.
It's incredible. If you rewind the clock back to 1990, Kiribati's maternal mortality was sitting at 197. Fast forward to the 2023 data, and that number has plummeted to 76.3.
That's a huge drop.
And if you are listening to this and wondering if 76 is good or bad, let me give you the global baseline. The world average right now is a staggering 216.
Let that mathematical reality sink in for a second. You have a nation ranked 140th in overall global development, entirely isolated in the Pacific, yet their maternal mortality rate is nearly 3 times better than the global average.
You have to ask yourself, how is this mechanically possible without massive, high-tech Western hospital infrastructure?
Yeah, they don't have robotic surgery wings on a coral atoll.
No, they definitely don't.
What this low mortality rate proves is the sheer power of foundational community healthcare combined with high female literacy. Tying it back to the education.
Exactly. It means their basic protocols, investing in local midwifery, establishing robust prenatal community networks, deploying grassroots health workers, are highly functional. And it ties directly back to that reverse education gap we talked about.
Because a woman with over 12 years of education is vastly more likely to understand prenatal nutrition.
Right. She can recognize the early warning signs of complications, and she'll proactively seek help. Educated mothers survive.
Okay, so the bedrock is solid. The medical system is keeping mothers alive during the act of childbirth. But the GII has another health metric, and when we look at it, a massive warning siren starts going off.
The adolescent birth rate.
Yes, the ABR. This measures how many teenagers, specifically young women ages 15 to 19, are having children per 1,000 women.
And here, the narrative completely flips.
It really does. The global average for adolescent births is roughly 39. Kiribati's rate is 44.0. They are performing demonstrably worse than the global average.
It's a very sharp contrast. So, help me make sense of this duality. On one hand, you have a medical system that is demonstrably fantastic at keeping women alive in the delivery room.
Yeah.
It shames much wealthier nations.
True.
But on the other hand, you have an abnormally high rate of teenage pregnancy. Where is the disconnect? I mean, is this a supply chain issue where remote islands just can't get physical access to contraception? Or is there a deeper social current at play here?
It is the stark difference between clinical medical care and systemic social autonomy.
Yeah, explain that.
The low maternal mortality rate proves that when a woman is in physical labor, the medical infrastructure works. The high adolescent birth rate, however, suggests that long before a young woman gets pregnant, she is navigating immense cultural and systemic hurdles regarding her own reproductive choices.
So even though she is sitting in a classroom longer than her male peers, she doesn't actually have the social power to dictate her own family planning.
Exactly. Education provides knowledge, but it doesn't automatically grant you the social capital to defy deeply entrenched community norms or patriarchal family structures. It suggests that teenage women in Kiribati might lack the private clinical access or the cultural permission to make independent choices about their bodies. It's a perfect illustration of how you can fix the medical mechanics of childbirth without having yet fixed the social mechanics of female empowerment.
Which brings us to, honestly, the most jarring contradiction in this entire deep dive. Let's stack up what we know.
Okay.
A young woman in Kiribati goes to school longer than a young man. She has a much better chance of surviving childbirth than the average global citizen. Her income gap relative to men is tighter than the global average.
All great signs.
Right. If you just fed those three ingredients into an algorithm, it would probably predict that women in Kiribati are running the country. But what happens when we actually look at who holds the levers of power? Let's examine the political glass ceiling.
This is where the statistics become genuinely difficult to reconcile. We have to look at parliamentary representation.
Right.
When we examine the legislative bodies, the places where the laws are written and the national budgets are allocated, the parity completely evaporates.
It is a devastating drop-off. According to the 2023 data, women hold exactly 6.67% of parliamentary seats in Kiribati.
Less than 7%.
Less than 7%.
Okay.
Just to put that into perspective, the global average, which international watchdogs already heavily criticize for being far too low, is roughly 26.5%.
It's a massive gulf.
And if we step out of the parliament and look at the broader labor force participation rate, the friction continues. In Kiribati, women are participating in the labor force at 43%, while men are at nearly 55%.
Now, it is absolutely vital that we look at this data objectively. We aren't here to impose a specific political ideology, but we must impartially report this massive, undeniable statistical contrast that the source data highlights.
Right, we're just looking at the numbers.
You have world-leading educational empowerment crashing headfirst into a near-total absence of realized political power.
So what does this all mean? How does this happen mechanically? If these women have the administrative skills, the degrees, and the health foundation, why are they practically invisible in the government? What is physically stopping them?
This raises an important question, and sociologists refer to this as the empowerment bottleneck. Kiribati is a textbook example of it.
Okay, the empowerment bottleneck.
What the data proves is that education and health are necessary foundations, but they are not a skeleton key. They do not automatically unlock the doors of established power structures.
Because politics is a whole different game.
Exactly. Think about the daily mechanics of running for political office. It requires immense amounts of free time, surplus financial capital to campaign, and access to deeply entrenched social networks.
None of which are guaranteed by a high school diploma.
Exactly. You can educate a generation of women, but if the cultural architecture of the society dictates that the burden of unpaid domestic care, cooking, cleaning, raising children, caring for elders falls exclusively on their shoulders, when exactly are they supposed to run for parliament?
They just don't have the hours in the day.
Furthermore, political systems in many traditional societies operate as established patriarchal networks. The avenues to nomination, the backing of local chiefs or community elders, those are often reserved for men.
Right.
The women of Kiribati have conquered the foundational victories of health and schooling, but they are hitting a structural, institutional wall that education alone cannot break down.
It's like we've given them a state-of-the-art map, a compass, and years of navigational training. But when they finally reach the ship, the door to the captain's cabin is deadbolted from the inside by people who refuse to hand over the keys.
That is a very apt analogy. Structural power rarely concedes voluntarily, regardless of how well-educated the challengers are.
So we've spent a lot of time dissecting the gender divide, but I want to shift gears and zoom out. I want to look at how Kiribati handles its resources across its entire population, regardless of whether you are a man or a woman.
A macro view.
Right. Because if you have incredibly limited resources, the way you distribute them tells you everything about a society's values. Let's introduce the IHDI, the Inequality Adjusted Human Development Index.
The IHDI is essentially a reality check for the entire world. It acknowledges a fundamental flaw in basic averages.
Yeah, averages can be so misleading.
Very. If you have a room with 10 people, and one person is a billionaire while the other 9 have $0, the average wealth of that room looks fantastic.
But the lived reality for 90% of the room is starvation.
Exactly. So the IHDI runs a country's development score through an algorithm that actively penalizes the nation based on how unequally its health, education, and wealth are hoarded by a select few.
I like to think of the IHDI loss as an inequality tax. If you picture a waterfall chart where you start with the overall HDI and then you deduct this tax to get your actual score, every country has to pay it.
It's a great way to visualize it.
When you run the entire globe through this algorithm of fairness, the world's overall development score shrinks by nearly 21.9%.
Almost 22%.
That is a massive global inequality tax. It basically proves that humans are generally terrible at sharing.
We really are.
But when you run Kiribati through that exact same algorithm, their HDI of 0.644 drops to an IHDI of 0.535. their tax penalty is only 16.9%.
Which is a profound revelation.
Yeah, they're beating the global average by a mile.
It means that whatever resources Kiribati does possess, they distribute them with remarkable fairness across their population. The loss to inequality is substantially less than the world average.
It beautifully reinforces the narrative we saw earlier with the tightened gender income gap. Structurally, Kiribati operates as a highly egalitarian society. They don't have a massive class of ultra-elites hoarding all the medicine and education while the rest of the island suffers.
Which are sharing the burden.
Right. But, and this is perhaps the heaviest but of our entire conversation, we have to stop looking at how they are distributing things and start looking at what exactly they are distributing.
Yes.
Because fair distribution of nothing is still nothing. To see this, we have to open up the MPI, the Multidimensional Poverty Index.
The MTI is vital because it completely throws out income as a metric. It doesn't care about your bank account.
Right. It looks at the physical deprivations people face in their homes every single day. Do you have cooking fuel? Do you have a toilet? Are your children malnourished?
And the data here is incredibly stark. Nearly 19.8% of Kiribati's population, so basically 1 in 5 people, lives in severe multidimensional poverty.
And the MPI report actually breaks down the causes of this poverty. If you imagine a pie chart, it shows us exactly what factors are dragging the population down.
The drag factors.
Right. Housing issues contribute about 13.3% to their poverty. School attendance issues contribute 11.3%. But the absolute largest drag, the biggest, heaviest slice of the poverty pie, is nutrition.
At 21.3%.
Yes. It contributes a massive 21.3% to their multidimensional poverty. Why is a nation surrounded by the Pacific Ocean starving for nutrition?
To understand the nutrition bottleneck, we really have to look at the severe ecological constraints of a coral atoll. The geography itself is the limiting factor.
Okay, walk me through that.
Well, the soil on these islands isn't the rich, dark loam you might find in North America or Europe. It is essentially broken down coral fragments and sand. It is incredibly alkaline and porous. It cannot hold water.
So you simply cannot practice traditional large-scale agriculture there?
No. You can't grow vast fields of wheat or vegetables.
So historically, they relied entirely on the ocean.
Yes, the reef was their supermarket. But we are now living in the era of severe climate change.
Right.
Ocean acidification is bleaching the coral reefs. Rising sea temperatures are altering fish migration patterns. And massive international commercial fleets have severely overfished the surrounding waters.
So their traditional, highly nutritious food sources are literally collapsing.
Which forces them to rely on the global supply chain. They have to import their food on massive cargo ships.
And if you were shipping food across thousands of miles of ocean to a remote, hot island, what kind of food actually survives that journey?
Highly processed, shelf-stable, sodium-heavy, nutritionally devoid items.
Canned meats, white rice, instant noodles.
Yeah.
And that creates a hard physical ceiling on human development that no amount of egalitarian distribution can ever fix. If the only food physically available on the island is nutritionally deficient, sharing that food perfectly equally just means the entire population becomes uniformly malnourished.
Right. You cannot outdistribute a lack of vitamins.
It perfectly explains why their foundational health care is good at keeping mothers alive in childbirth. But the daily lived experience of health and vitality remains so compromised for the population.
It is the ultimate tragedy of their geography. They have built a remarkably fair society on a foundation of sand, and the external world is making it harder and harder for them to feed themselves.
Which naturally brings us to the final and, honestly, arguably the most vital dimension of this deep dive.
The environmental bill.
Yes, we've spent the last 45 minutes looking at what Kiribati's development costs its citizens. We've seen the sacrifices families make to educate their daughters, the daily struggle to find nutritious food, the systemic barriers keeping women out of parliament. But now we have to flip the lens entirely.
We have to ask, what does Kiribati's development cost the planet?
Exactly. And to answer that, we look at the newest metric in the global toolkit, the PHDI, the Planetary Pressures Adjusted Human Development Index.
This metric does something truly revolutionary. It takes a country's development score and actively penalizes it based on the environmental damage that country is inflicting on the Earth.
It measures the carbon footprint and the material footprint.
Right. It forces a country to look at its development and ask, did we achieve this by burning down our own house?
So let's look at the literal environmental bill for Kiribati. We are going to look at carbon dioxide emissions per capita. Right now, the global average is roughly 4.536 tons of CO2 per person per year.
And Kiribati's per capita emission.
It is an infinitesimal 0.517 tons.
The global average is nearly 8.7 times higher than Kiribati's footprint.
It's barely a blip.
The material cost of an average citizen in Kiribati is a fraction of the cost of a citizen in the industrialized West. They are practically a ghost on the global carbon ledger.
I want to take a moment to synthesize everything we've unpacked today, because when you stack these facts together, like if you were to plot this on a radar chart comparing Kiribati to the world, you create the ultimate modern paradox. Let's build the profile of what we can call the Kiribati model.
Okay, let's hear it.
First, they have a massive, culturally ingrained investment in female education, which results in a world-leading low gender development gap.
Check.
Second, they have an incredibly low industrial baseline, which means their carbon emissions and planetary pressure are practically zero.
Right.
Third, they have strong egalitarian social foundations that result in very low inequality loss. They share what little they have with remarkable fairness.
But the fourth point is the brutal catch.
Yeah.
Their absolute income is severely low, their political empowerment is totally bottlenecked by patriarchal structures, and basic foundational human nutrition is a critical failure point, causing rampant multidimensional poverty.
And the reason this is so fascinating to me is because if you look at the stated political goals of almost every highly developed, ultra-rich nation on Earth right now, what are they?
Carbon neutrality and gender parity.
Exactly. They're spending trillions of dollars desperately trying to achieve carbon neutrality, and they are passing endless legislation trying to achieve true gender parity. Kiribati is basically already achieving the ecological and gender parity goals that Western nations can only dream of.
But they are doing it under the heavy, crushing weight of absolute poverty.
Right.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Kiribati really represents the core existential challenge of the 21st century. Think about the historical playbook of human development. For the last 200 years, the model has been very simple. If you want to cure poverty, if you want to build hospitals and fix nutrition, you must industrialize.
You must clear-cut the forests, build massive factories, burn millions of tons of fossil fuels, and drive up your GDP at all costs.
Grow first, clean up the mess later. But we now know, as a scientific certainty, that the planet's atmosphere simply cannot handle another wave of nations industrializing the way the West did. The carbon budget is blown.
Yeah.
Furthermore, Kiribati doesn't have the luxury of ignoring climate change because they are literally on the front lines. A rising sea level isn't a theoretical debate for them. It is an existential threat to the very land they stand on.
So the ultimate question for us today becomes, how on earth does Kiribati raise its absolute income, build modern infrastructure, and solve its severe nutrition crisis without skyrocketing its carbon footprint?
It's the impossible puzzle.
How do they lift their people out of poverty without destroying their pristine ecological balance and literally sinking the islands they live on?
It requires a massive, unprecedented paradigm shift in how the global community values and supports nations like Kiribati. Right now, by emitting almost zero carbon, Kiribati is essentially subsidizing the carbon budget of the wealthy nations.
Oh, that's a great point.
They are absorbing all the consequences of global warming, dying reefs, rising tides, extreme weather, while contributing nothing to the cause. The industrialized world owes them not just aid, but a third way to develop.
Third way.
Yes. They need massive investments in green technology, sustainable aquaculture that can actually survive an acidified ocean, and deep structural support that doesn't force them to choose between starving or burning coal.
It is the ultimate tightrope walk. They can't stay trapped in multidimensional poverty, but the world simply cannot afford for them to follow the 20th century carbon-heavy playbook to get out of it.
And internally, as the data clearly shows, the path forward must focus on dismantling those final structural barriers we talked about.
Right, the bottlenecks.
They must smash the nutrition bottleneck through agricultural innovation and better, fairer trade agreements. And crucially, they must break the empowerment bottleneck.
The parliament seats.
Yes. They have an incredible rising generation of highly educated, resilient women. It is time for the cultural norms to shift, to relieve the unequal burden of unpaid domestic labor, and to finally give those educated women a proportional seat in parliament. The foundational work has been done. The structural walls are what remain.
But we have covered a truly massive amount of ground today, from the macroeconomics of global indices to the micro-realities of farming on a coral atoll. We started with a nation ranked 140th in the world, a nation that, on paper, looked like it was losing the race.
But by peeling back the layers, we revealed a society that proves something vital.
It proves that even in conditions of extreme punishing resource scarcity, the cultural choice to prioritize educational equity and social distribution can yield world-beating parity and incredibly low inequality. They're running the race differently.
They are a testament to the fact that progress is not entirely dependent on the size of a nation's bank account. Values dictate outcomes just as much as wealth does.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to chew on as you go about your week.
Yeah.
We spend so much time in our modern, hyper-industrialized world, assuming that a massive GDP is the single, absolute prerequisite for social equality. We have convinced ourselves that you have to be rich to be fair.
Right.
But when you look at Kiribati, with its incredibly low carbon footprint, its tight relative pay gaps, and its fiercely equitable social distribution, we have to ask ourselves a really hard, uncomfortable question.
What's that?
Is true, sustainable human development only possible when we finally stop viewing progress purely as the relentless accumulation of massive wealth? Should we start viewing progress as a shared, highly coordinated survival strategy within the absolute limits of our planet?
It's a powerful thought.
Think back to that marathon we started with. Maybe the runner at the back of the pack isn't losing at all. Maybe, just maybe, they are the only one running a pace that will actually allow them to finish the race without burning the entire track down. Keep exploring, keep questioning the numbers you see in the news, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.